Hello everyone, I am Rod and I am the game design instructor for the Academy of Entertainment Arts over at Dixie Hollins High School. If you are one of my students, it's Mr. Flowers to you, and welcome to this video tutorial. Welcome back everybody. In the last tutorial we went over how to make the basic setup for our platformer with some character sprites that aren't very character-like but give you the idea, a player object, a wall object, two system components, and a level. At this point we can walk around. Go ahead and run this. So at this point I can walk to the right, I can walk to the left. If I let go, my character remains facing in the correct direction, but I can't jump yet. To set up the jump, we need to do a little bit more work. So I'm going to jump over into, see what I did there. I want to set up collision with the player first. So open up the object player, step event, and we have our movement here. And I want to set up some collision just so that we can hit the wall. So we'll say horizontal collision with wall. So if place meeting, this is our collision function. There are a few of these, but this is the one that's commonly used. So if we hit the wall, and we're going to check our current position, and we're going to also check ahead a little bit, because objects in a game do not move linearly through space. That's a false conception that we have, or a preconception that we have living in the real world. If you fire a bullet, the bullet travels through space all the way through as far as we know. But in a game engine, it doesn't. If you say my character moves 10 pixels, then every step it goes from 10 to 20 to 30 to 40. It jumps over the pixels in between. So what you have to do is look ahead a little bit to see where the player will be and then make adjustments to it. So we're going to take our x position plus our velocity x. And then we're going to take our y position, and then we want to compare it to the nearest object. So this, in this case, it's going to be object wall. There you. And then close that off. So if we're moving and we are going to run into a wall, then we're going to set up a condition that says get us closer to the wall. So we'll say inch us to the wall 1 pixel at a time. So we're going to say while, this is a loop, and this will continue to run as long as this condition remains true. So while, exclamation point, this means not, so while we are not hitting the wall, place meeting, we are going to check. So if we are going to hit the wall, we're going to check how much space we have before we hit the wall. So as long as we're not touching the wall, we can inch closer to it. I can't remember the person who first came up with this particular sequence, but it's actually quite useful. I know Elspeth Dev does it in his video long time ago, but there was somebody before him who had this particular line. So give credit where credit's due. I just don't remember what his name is. So while we're not touching something, we're going to say x plus the sign of our velocity x. So what this is going to do is it's going to take whatever our sign value is, and it's basically just going to return a value of 1. So let's kind of click on this here, and we'll get a description. So the function returns whether a number is positive or negative, or neither. It returns a 1 or a positive 1, or it returns a positive 1 or a negative 1 or a 0, respectively. So if we're moving in the negative, and it takes the sign of whatever that value is, it's going to return a negative 1. If it's a positive number, it'll return a positive 1. Okay? So if I'm moving to the left, then it's going to inch us closer to the wall minus 1 pixel at a time. And if we're moving to the right, it's going to move us plus 1 pixel at a time. So I'm going to jump back into my wall here. Oops. Or my player, sorry about that. So while not place meeting, our velocity x. Our velocity y will not change while we're moving horizontally, so we're not going to worry about that right now. And then we're going to compare ourselves to the nearest object, which will be the wall. So while we are not touching the wall, we are going to inch ourselves closer. So the x value is going to be plus equal to the sine of our velocity x. So if we are moving to the left, it will add a -1 to our position until we hit the wall. If we are moving to the right, it's going to add a +1 to our position until we hit the wall. And then, once this loop is done running, we're going to stop moving. So down here, we're going to say stop moving. So velocity x will be set to 0. And we can test that. Let's go ahead and run it. So if I'm walking to the wall, bam, I hit it. Can't get any closer. If I had a wall over here, you'd see me hit that one as well. And just for the sake of running it, I'm going to add a wall to there. So let's move our player over, and I'll add a wall. Good enough. So there's that wall, and there's that one. Cool. So now that we can hit the wall, we're going to finish our vertical collision, set up some gravity, and set up the jump. So jump back into our player. And I'm not going to copy and paste this. I'm just going to write it again so you can see, because we're going to change some features to it. So vertical collisions with wall. Same kind of scenario. If place meeting and our x position, but this time we're checking our y position with our y speed. So y plus our velocity y. This way, because we're moving up or down, we want to check ahead a little bit to see where our player is going to be. Then we need the object we're comparing with. So object wall. So if we're going to run into the wall, we're going to check how close we can get. So inch us to the wall 1 pixel at a time. While we are not hitting the wall, so while exclamation point, place meeting. Our x is going to be its current position, and then our y is going to check for the sine of the velocity y. And then we want to compare to the wall object, so object wall. Yeah, so now we're going to check to see how close we can get. So y plus equals the sine of velocity y. So if we're going to hit the wall, we're going to check how close we can get. So if we're not touching it, we'll inch 1 pixel at a time toward the wall. And then once we hit the wall, our velocity y will stop. So stop moving. So velocity y is equal to 0. We're not going to be able to see this one working until we put gravity in. So we need to set up a condition for when we're jumping and for gravity. First, let's do our jump. What we're going to do here is place our jumping sequence, but there's a trick to this. Whenever you're writing code, you want to avoid scenarios where you have to repeat code. So, for example, we can jump. Our player is allowed to jump and face right. Our player is allowed to jump and face left. So I don't want to set up a jump scenario that also checks if we're facing left or right. However, I don't want to have to write 2 jumping sequences either. For example, if I'm in my right situation, I'd have to set up a condition to where I'm allowed to jump. And if I'm in my left condition, I'd have to set up an area where I'm allowed to jump. So it's a catch-22 where you want to put this stuff. And you kind of have to play around where the placement's going to be and how it's going to interfere with other things. For me, I tend to find if I use just if statements, I can have this piece check if I'm jumping or not. This whole thing check if I'm jumping. If I'm not jumping, then I see all this. However, if I am jumping, then, vice versa. Let's go up to here. If we were just doing like a Mario setup, we could just get away with an if statement here. So I think I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to go if state is not equal to jump, then we're going to run these conditions here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to change my state variable just because we're not really using it in a way that makes sense. So I'm just going to call this, I'm going to do this like, as if we're doing a Mario game. So I'm going to say, because we have is facing, which direction we're facing, I'm going to create a variable called is jumping. So I'll say is jumping. And I'm just going to say not. So if we are not jumping, we're going to run this code. I'm going to change the state variable to is jumping. And instead of idle, I will call this true or false. So right now we're not jumping, so it's going to be false. And now let's jump over to our script. But we will need a button. So while I'm in here, I'm going to say toggle jump button. So if object button, object input dot button x. So if we hit the X button, some stuff's going to happen. So we're going to say object player dot is jumping will be true. We'll also have a condition that says object player dot velocity y will be equal to jump speed. But we are going to be moving up. So down is a positive number, up is a negative number. So this will be minus jump speed. That'll work. Jump back into player. I'm not trying to be punny. So if is jumping is not true, then we've got all of this stuff happening for our idle and our walk to occur. However, this will be our else. Else, if we are jumping, then we need to find out which direction we're facing. So which direction, or which way, make it simple. Which way are we jumping? If is facing is right, then sprite index is going to be spr underscore player jump to the right. Else, so the only two possibilities if we're jumping is if we're facing right or facing left. So just go ahead and copy this piece. And this is going to be there. I don't know why I put a parenthesis on there. We don't need the parenthesis. Left. So if we're jumping and we're facing right, we will see this. Else, we'll be going left. Simple enough. Now we're going to try to test this. Let's go ahead and run it. If I hit the spacebar, I do jump. Awesome. But I can't get down. The reason I can't get down is gravity. So let's go ahead and turn on gravity. So make a new spot, call it update gravity. And the way to run the gravity is just to check our y velocity. So if our velocity y is less than or equal to our gravity value, so global dot grav, then update our velocity based on the gravity. So then we're going to do vy plus equal to global dot gravity. So that should pull us down. So I can jump and come back down. Whee! And slowly descend until I hit the wall. Whee! Now my gravity isn't quite as fast as it should be. The other thing is, I'm able to hold down the spacebar and continue to jump infinitely. So we need to fix that issue as well. Let's go back into here. So I'm going to change the global gravity to a different value. We're going to say however fast we actually want it to move. We'll say a positive 12. So if we're less than or equal to a positive 12, then it's going to accelerate us to our value of gravity. That should get us moving a little bit quicker. There we go. That's a faster gravity. So now I need to solve the problem with the spacebar. So whenever I hit spacebar, it should tell us that is jumping is true and allow us to do this jump. But there really isn't anything that says is jumping is false. Nothing turns this back to not jump. The only reason why we're not continuing to float is our check input function here. This thing says as long as we're holding the button, our jump speed happens. But our is jumping variable is still true. We want this to be set to false after a certain point is reached. We need to set up a condition that says whether or not we can jump and deal with that. So I'm going to create a variable here. Condition, I'm going to say if can jump, then these happen. So we're going to have a check. This is going to say, can we jump? So if we can jump, yes, this will happen. But we also want to set this to false. So object player.canJump will be false. So if we can jump, we will jump. It'll be set to false. Let's go back into the player. After is jumping, we'll set up can jump. Right now it's true because when the game starts we're not jumping, therefore we are allowed to jump. And we'll come back into here. Now we're going to set up a condition that says if we are jumping, or if we are not jumping, then can jump is true. I can do that here. I can say if we're not jumping, then can jump is true. Or I can do that when we hit the ground. Right here, I'll say if we are not jumping, so if, then can jump is true. And then down here, inside of our vertical collision, we're going to tell it that the moment we hit something, we are no longer jumping. So stop moving, that happens, but I also want to stop jumping. So stop jumping. So is jumping, we're going to say false. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and test this. And this should work fine. We might have to set up a different condition, but whatever. I've got a malformed assignment. Where is that? Line 25. Oh, yes, I did not put an equal sign there. I need one. There we go. I keep hitting F5, which is the compile button, but it is also the button that turns off my recording software. Okay, so jump, boom. That works. Boop, boop. Now, I don't jump high enough. So two things I'm going to fix. One, I'm going to go back into the player. I'm going to scroll up to my velocity, my gravity option here. And I'm going to change this to global dot max grav, just because I like variables and I like being able to control them in a nice tidy place. I'm going to go into my object game, create event, and I'm going to have global dot max grav. That's going to be 12. So if I ever have to change it, it's here. And if I ever have to use it for another object, it's also here. Okay? You'll find that as you're programming and you put random numbers in places that aren't attached to a variable, you're going to be like, what the heck is causing this thing to be 15? Where is it? Why? And then you'll find out when you run the debugger and you go like, oh, yeah. So that'll solve that for future problems. And then I'm going to jump back into the player. And I want to increase my jump speed. So create event, and my jump speed, I'm going to have him jump a little bit faster. I'll do 15. And we'll see if that gets us a good jumping height. That's not too bad. Not high enough to clear the block, though. But you can see that I can hold down the spacebar and no jumpy happens until I hit the ground. Bam. Bam. So I'll close this. Let's bump this up to 24. And I almost hit F5 again, which would turn off my recording software. I've done that like 4 times already. Every time I scream, I'm like, why? Wow, that's way too high. But it does allow us to see a problem. So the problem is, if I hold down spacebar and I'm hitting the ceiling, you can see that I'm able to stay jumping. It's flipping between jumping and idle. And the reason for that is we're hitting a wall, and if we hit a wall, we say that we're not allowed to jump anymore. We're no longer jumping, and therefore, if we're not jumping, we can jump. So that's the situation we're going to have to fix. We'll also have to fix the height of our jump. Our jump's a little bit too high. Bink. And now I can jump mid-air because I've hit the wall, so technically I'm allowed to jump. Bink, bink. Now you could set that for like wall kicking. If you're against the wall and then kick, you can do a wall kick. Let's go ahead and exit this. And I'll go back into player. Yeah, that's fine. Player, step event. And we need to set it up so that can jump is allowed. So to do this, you can do a few different things. You can come into here and you can modify this value here. But I'm not going to do that here. Like you could set up a jump height and speed and ratios and all this stuff. I'm not going to do that here just yet. Set up another variable. You don't have to do it this way. I'm going to do it this way just because I'm going to be using this later anyway. So over here, I'm going to create a new variable. We're going to call this isFalling. So isFalling. And I'm going to use this so that in a scenario where our character has has jumped and is now being pulled down by gravity, he is now falling. If he is walking, he gets hit by an enemy and gets knocked back and then falls. The character is falling. So if you're falling, you're not necessarily jumping, but you're still being pulled by gravity. So that's another scenario where you might not be able to jump. So I'm going to grab this. You could use the same variable, but I hate doing that. I hate having the same thing used for multiple things if I don't need it to. So in this case, I have a condition that just checks to see if we're falling. So if not is falling. So if we're not falling, so if we're not jumping and we're not falling, then can jump is now true. To make this work, let's go down to our vertical collision here. And we have our condition that says if we hit a wall, then we are no longer jumping. But we also want to have a condition that checks to see if we are now falling. So where it says stop jumping, I'm going to set up a condition. If is jumping, that means if we were jumping at the time we hit the wall, then we are no longer going to be jumping, but we now will be falling. So is falling will be true. However, if we are no longer falling, this is going to be this else condition here, then is falling will be false. So if we hit the wall and we are jumping at the time that we're hitting it, then we are no longer jumping, but we are now falling. However, if we are not jumping when we hit the wall, then the only other possibility is we were probably falling. So now we are no longer falling. And we can test to see if that's going to work. So I'll hit play. Alright, I'm going to jump, hit the wall, and I fall. Bam. And I can't extra jump, I can toggle this. Whee! Now I have a platformer. Whee! So lastly, I want to adjust exactly how high I can jump. Because I'm kind of hitting the wall here, and that's sort of annoying. So come into my create event. What did I try last time? I tried 18. I think I tried 15. I'm going to do 18 for my jump speed. We're going to change this again a little bit later on, but for right now, I just want to get a decent jump without hitting that wall. Okay, I don't quite hit the ceiling, and I can clear the block. Okay. So that is all we're going to do for this particular sequence. We have our jumping animation, our left and right, and we can jump here. Yay. In the next video, we're going to set up a better animation sequence and a pressure-sensitive jump button. So if you ever played Mario or any platformer game, you might notice that when you jump, if you hold down the jump button, you jump higher than if you were to just tap it. Right now, if we tap the jump button, it has a finite speed, so it's always jumping at the same rate, no matter what. But sometimes you want to jump higher a little bit, or you would just want to jump a small amount. So, for example, like if there were some sort of item up here that was swinging that could hit us, but we still need to be able to jump over like a little turtle, we wouldn't want to jump too high to get our head cut off, but we want to jump high enough to not hit this and be able to jump over the turtle. So in the next tutorial, we'll set up that and some better animation. And I will see you guys next time.